I'm Shauna Fleischbein with Castle Group. I'm the Senior Business Development Manager for our Sarasota, Tampa, and Orlando areas. And I'm joined today by Laura Bryant.
Hi. Thank you, Shauna. Yes, I'm Laura Bryant. I'm the Business Development Manager here in Southwest Florida, down here with Richard in the Naples area, Estero area. So Richard, thank you for joining us today and going in what you know how to do well, which is how to run a board meeting effectively. And let's hope that we can share this with everyone who's attending. So Richard, I'll let you introduce yourself and your firm. And I'm going to tell you, you have to update your headshot. We just had to update ours, so you have to update yours.
Well, I got to update mine for many reasons. Like that's about 10 years old and I look a little different. Anyway, Richard DeBose, Godey DeBose and Cross. We are a full service law firm with a primary practice area in condo and HOA and all things community and association law. I want to thank Castle Group for inviting me to speak. This is the best part of the job is having these Q&As and these webinars. And I hope you enjoy it. If you'd like a copy of the program after, I think that would be available.
Yep.
And you can always reach out to me, the contact information on the side later. Thank you.
Yep, we will be. Shauna and I will both be emailing out your presentation, Richard, in a PDF, and Richard's contact information after our webinar. It'll be done this week. We'll guarantee that.
By the end of the week, yeah. And we'll include a link to the recording too. So I know sometimes people have to jump off or they want to share it with another board member or a committee member. So we'll make sure we link the recording to this as well. So you can revisit it or share it.
Yeah. All right. Let's get started.
Okay, so this is really how to run a board meeting effectively. The goal being that your board meeting should be no more than an hour long. That's kind of corporate America is they want to have those board meetings in an hour. So this is going to be tips to have you. We're going to cover things like having a purpose for the meeting, providing enough notice and the appropriate materials, being how to chair it effectively, how to follow proper meeting procedure under Florida law, and how to have set up your agenda and keep the minutes, ensure that everybody has a right to speak within a reasonable amount of time and accomplish the results or the purpose of the meeting, and again, how to document it properly in the minutes. So let's get the basics under Florida law, and I'm talking about Chapter 718 for condominiums, Chapter 720 for HOAs, and Chapter 719 for cooperatives. These are the general rules. This is the most important one, and this is the one that people want to not follow because it's inefficient. Those of you that are in private business, when you want to have a meeting, you just have a meeting, you make decisions, you can do it any way you want, and things get done efficiently, okay? Condominiums and HOAs do not run efficiently because the law generally requires you to have meetings when what's called the sunshine, which means open to the members with the right to attend and the right to speak. So when does a board meeting occur? It occurs when a quorum of the board is together and they discuss association business or matters. For example, if you have a 5-person board, if 3 board members are physically together in the same room, the same car, at the same bar, or they're on a Zoom call like this together, or they're on a telephone conference call together, real-time communication presence. If 3 or more of you are together and you talk about association business, even something as innocuous as we need to paint the clubhouse, it's looking shabby, and someone else says, yeah, we ought to paint it blue. That is a board meeting. There are a minority of attorneys that will tell you if you don't make motions and you don't actually do any voting, it's not a meeting and you can do it outside the sunshine. I absolutely disagree with that. I think 99% of the attorneys in the state disagree with it. If a quorum of the board is together and you're discussing association matters, that's a meeting, and we'll get into what's required to have a legal meeting. So who can attend that meeting? The members of the association and any invited guests of the board have the right to attend all board meetings with certain exceptions, which we'll cover. Who can speak at the meeting? It provides that the law provides that members can speak on each agenda item for up to 3 minutes, typically, et cetera, et cetera. So.
I wanted to check it. We have a question just popped in. It's about board workshops. Are board workshops actually board meetings when a quorum of the board are in attendance and community association matters are discussed?
Absolutely. You can put whatever label you want on it. Workshop, study session, planning session, future whatever, if a quorum of the board is together and you discuss association business, it is a meeting, if and no buts about it. That's it. So labels don't matter. If a quorum is together and they talk about association business.
Hey, Richard, real quick question, just because we get asked this a lot. So when, and I've heard attorneys give kind of multiple interpretations, and I'm sure they're going to. Presentations from a vendor. So if they're not having discussion or anything of that matter, but they're getting a presentation from a vendor, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it would be very difficult for a quorum of the board to sit there in front of a vendor who gives a presentation and not ask him a question, even one question. That's discussing business in my mind. So if they sat there stone-faced silent and just listened and didn't say a thing to each other or to the vendor, I suppose there's no verbal discussion, but I think that's, not realistic that that's going to happen. So yes, I believe that's a board meeting.
Another question regarding quorum. We have, this question comes from Patricia. We have a vacancy on our 5-member board, so 4 members currently, what constitutes a quorum with 4 members? 3,
same as it would be for 5, a majority.
All right, wonderful. Good questions coming in already. All right, next slide.
Okay, when can you have a closed or executive session board meeting? The statutes provide 2 literal times. One, when the lawyer is present and they're discussing attorney-client privilege matters or proposed or pending litigation, which means somebody's going to sue you or you're about to sue somebody or there's been a threat of a suit. That's number 1, attorney present discussing attorney-client privilege matters. 2, to discuss personnel matters, which the law doesn't define what a personnel matter is, but in its strictest sense, it's something involving your employee. Most of your associations don't have employees. Some do. They have contracted vendors such as Castle Management. In my opinion, the personnel matter privilege can be extended as far as your manager goes, okay? Or possibly an on-site handyman or something like that. To start talking about the landscaper and the lawyer and other vendors, they're not your personnel. Technically, Castle Management's not your personnel because they're not your employee. They're a contracted vendor, but they're as close to being your employee as they could be without actually being the employee. So I'm good with that. The third one is not really defined in the statute. It doesn't say when there's an emergency, you can close a board meeting, but under the emergency authority found in the statutes, it says you can have a board meeting under a state of emergency with as little notice as is practicable. So that means you could just get together in 5 minutes and say, we're having a board meeting. You didn't really notice it properly. You're not keeping members out, but they're not really aware of it. So that one's very limited. The other thing is, let me tell you, I know folks are saying, well, if 3 of us are together every time and we discuss association business, how do we get anything done during the week? You're allowed to talk to each other via email, okay? You can talk via email about the upcoming board meeting. You can talk on email about how you feel about certain issues and, how you're supportive of this idea or you're not supportive, but you can't vote via email. Those email discussions are not considered a board meeting, but those email discussions quite probably are available to the owners as an official records request. So those are the 2 closed board meetings, lawyer present for litigation purposes or lawyer without the lawyer for personnel matters. What is proper notice? There's 2 types of notice for board meetings. There's regular board meetings, which require 48-hour single posted notice. If you're a condominium with 150 or more units, you also have to put that on your website. Regular board meetings are just about every board meeting you have is going to be a regular board meeting. There are certain meetings called special board meetings that require 14 days mailed and posted notice. A special board meeting occurs when you adopt a special assessment, a rule affecting the use of the unit or the home, electronic voting, and in the case of a condominium, and I believe a cooperative as well, when the board adopts the budget, that requires more notice. An agenda is required for condo and co-op board meetings. Agenda is not technically required for an HOA board meeting unless the bylaws provide for it.
We had a couple more questions come in. One of these I think you kind of already touched on. If the board is together talking about hiring a property manager, is that considered as a board meeting? So that kind of goes to personnel.
It is a board meeting, but I believe it's properly closed because you're discussing, let's say, for example, well, if you're discussing hiring a manager or yes, I believe that's qualifies as a personnel matter that could be closed.
Okay. If the state of Florida is investigating the board, since that is an administration issue, can they close the board meeting to the members, even if the lawyer is present? I think there were two separate questions.
Yes. If the lawyer's present, and he is operating to, that gets a little complicated because obviously the lawyer represents the association, not the board themselves, but the board is indemnified until they're found guilty. So I think generally I would say, yes, that would be a proper reason to close the board meeting.
Okay, and one last one regarding posting. Posted in paper for the 48 hours or email notification for many sounds like they have a lot of absentee owners that aren't there physically.
You have to post it on the physical property, which means literal physical posting with paper, but you could, and it's quite often done in this day and age as a courtesy, you email that notice to everyone as well, because so many people are, not around.
Perfect, we're good.
Okay, so meeting purpose. Okay, first of all, as a general concept, you should have a meeting because there's some work or business you need to do. You don't just say we're having a board meeting just to have a board meeting, and unless you like going to board meetings and just sitting there. You have a regular board meeting the third Tuesday at 8 o'clock on every month. If the owners are like that and that's where they like to come and talk to the board, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But you don't have to have a meeting if there's nothing the board needs to do that particular month or week or whatever. So don't have a board meeting just because, well, we got to have a board meeting. There's got to be a reason, okay? And that reason is what's listed here: to make decisions, to set policy, to solve problems, to plan and evaluate for future upcoming events, and to inform the owners. Now, keep in mind, there is no voting by email. We talked about that. You can't say we're not having a meeting this month because we all voted by email what we were going to do regarding the pets and the landscaping and the management. That's not legal because you have to have a board meeting to do it and you can't vote by email. So those are the four general categories of why you have a meeting. That fifth one is important because it's an efficient way for the members to come and talk to the board. That email sounds like it's efficient, but then the email gets blasted around to different people. Everybody starts chiming in and it becomes a really long email chain. So I encourage boards to communicate at board meetings, and then the minutes or the recording of the board meeting, other people can look at it. And then, if you do emails, email everybody. But I have seen boards, and I know Laura and Shauna can probably talk to this. When the board tries to answer everybody's questions via email, I mean, it becomes just a morass of never-ending emails, people chiming in, and it just becomes chaotic. I think it's better to have it at an organized board meeting where you ask the question once and you answer it once.
Yeah, and then sometimes if it's not super formal stuff, or if it's not things that the board necessarily has to address, we even do like little town hall meetings and things of that need, like more informal things with the manager or the staff, that they can answer questions. So there's ways of doing that too, to where you don't end up with that long drawn out board meeting either, right?
Right. Okay. And let's talk about that. Well, we're going to get into that. So now you've decided to have the meeting. How are you going to prepare for it? Okay. There's a couple of concepts here. Some boards are very hands-on and they know the agenda. They put everything together and they give it to the manager and say, this is how we're going to do it. Or the president takes on the role of actually setting it all up. That's perfectly fine way to do it. Another way is where oftentimes the manager will have a more pulse on what the hands-on needs of the association are for this month. And so they'll suggest, here's what we need to talk about at the next board meeting. We have to decide to extend the landscaping contract or not. We have to decide what time we're going to start, planting the petunias, whatever it might be. So whichever way, the general way is you have the board kind of organize everything and give it to the manager and say, this is what we're going to do, or the manager does it. Oftentimes it's a bit of a mix of both. I don't know if Laura and Shauna, you have some ideas of how you think it works best for you all.
Yeah, typically, yeah, I would agree with you. It's the president, the board members will communicate to the president anything they want to see on the agenda, and then the manager has their own, recommendations of things that should be discussed, whether it's proposals or some issues or policies that need to be adopted. And then that, they communicate with the president, and the president and the manager come up with the agenda.
Okay. Okay, the keys to preparation. Everyone should be clear about the role they play and what needs to be done prior to the meeting. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about this. I mean, organization, the reason meetings go just long, there's several, but the first one starts with preparation. If the board isn't organized and the agenda organized and the material presented to the board members in advance of the meeting, you're off on the wrong foot right there. Okay. The second thing is the roles that everybody plays, and we're going to talk about the different roles, but as board members that are not the chairman, you're not the president, your primary role is to come to the meeting prepared, read the information. Okay. Meetings go too long because board members had the board meeting packet a week ago and they didn't open it up until 10 minutes into the meeting, and then they start having questions and confusion, and that drags things out. So as just a regular board member, your biggest role is to come prepared, having read the material, because otherwise your meetings are going to run too long.
Yep.
Okay. Again, and part of this goes to the organization. Adequate notice has been provided to the board members in a format that's previously been agreed upon. I mean, I don't expect a board member to come to the board meeting prepared, and I've seen this at meetings. The manager comes to the board meeting with the board meeting packets and hands them out as the meeting's about to start. Well, you can't expect the board member to come prepared if the meeting packet that they're supposed to review hasn't been given to them to the meeting. So it goes hand in hand. Your board should have a policy. That's part of your organization, that all board meeting packets will be provided to the members, under normal circumstances, to the board members at least 3 days in advance or something. That's number one. Copies of all documents needed prior to the meeting should be in those board meeting packets. Okay. Again, if there's a contract to be reviewed, it should be in that board meeting packet so everybody can play their part.
Yep. And once the agenda is posted, no last minute changes to the agenda.
Yeah, technically in a condo, since you have to have the agenda 48 hours in advance, if it's not on the agenda 40 hours in advance, unless 2/3 of the board votes at the meeting to add it to the agenda, you can't add it to the agenda for anything to actually be done. You can talk about this new thing that just happened, but you can't take action on it, which means vote on it if it hasn't been on the agenda, unless you add it by a 2/3 majority vote of the board to kind of like an emergency addition to the agenda. Okay, effective chairing. This is probably the most important part of running a good meeting. Okay. You got to have it, and the chairperson is oftentimes the president, and sometimes it's the manager, and sometimes it's even a temporary chairperson. And it's not because it's an ego thing that I'm the president, so I get to run the meeting. Who's best at running meetings? Okay, and that's someone who you keep things going. Okay, you keep things moving along. You cut off debate that's just starting to become repetitive. And you keep the meeting moving. The president may be a great leader. They may be a great organizer. Maybe they're not really good at running meetings. Okay. So maybe your manager's better at running the meetings. Maybe the lawyer, if they're there sometimes, or maybe even the vice president, someone who knows how to run a meeting, keeps things on track. That's number one. And that the timelines are respected. One of the tips that somebody gave me years ago that I've seen that works really well is when you have the agenda, you place on it amount of general time you're going to use on that item, like call to order, establish a quorum, proof of notice, 1 minute. Okay, that's what it says, 1 minute. The next, officers' reports, president's report, 5 minutes. You put a time amount on each one. I think that helps people look at it and go, okay, we're not going to spend all day on this. Now, that doesn't mean you can go a little longer on that particular item, but try to do that and keep it up to an hour. I mean, should be your goal. Put enough time on there so that everybody gets their voice heard and you get your things accomplished. But not having that and people just have a free-for-all is what makes meetings go much longer than they really should. So during the meeting, the chair should encourage participation by all board members within reason, okay? There's always that one board member that has their pet peeve that wants to go on and on and on, and the manager or the chairperson needs to simply say, that's not on the agenda. We're not discussing dogs. That's not on the agenda. And respectfully say, we're moving on, okay? Allow time for all views to be heard and discussed within reason. Again, what I see is board members that just want to go back over the same old thing again and again, and we're going to talk about what they're really trying to do there. Ensure that members understand the discussion and the terms of the issue by asking for clarifications when necessary. So make sure, that everybody understands what we're talking about is this particular item, not this tangent item over here. So when you bring an item up for discussion, make sure everyone understands what it is, the critical point we're trying to make here, or the piece of business we're trying to decide.
A question that came in prior to starting was when the board is in discussion about a motion, when is this discussion limited to just the board members, and when do you open it up to the members?
Okay, that's a good question. First of all, the proper way to conduct board business is motion. I move that we hire Castle Management to be our manager. Who makes the motion? Then somebody says second. I second that motion. Then next is board discussion. That's the proper way. The board then discusses it amongst themselves. And then I think the best way, not the only way, but the best way is before the board votes after their discussion, they turn to the audience and say, are there any comments from the members on this topic? Okay. Here's another thing that I see happen all the time. They'll say, is there any comment on this? And you should be fairly quick on it. Hearing no comments, we're moving to vote. Don't beg the people to start. There's always the people that are a little shot. Nobody wants to go first, right? So they don't want to raise their hand. And why you want them to discuss things, when you're out there begging them to discuss something where nobody initially said they wanted to discuss it, somebody finally raises their hand, and then the floodgates open and you have half hour of discussion where nobody initially wanted to do it. I'm not saying stop them from talking, but if there's not quickly saying, yes, I have a question or I want to discuss something, you don't have to beg them to talk. The other thing is, another way that board meetings go long is when you don't have, this goes back to the chair. It does not have tight control of not only the board, but tight control of the audience. You need to set the rules up front. You're not going to jump in front of us and shout out. You're not going to speak before we ask you to speak. You will have an appropriate time, which typically is after the board discussion and before the vote, or you can have an owner comment time on agenda items right up front at the meeting. Either one of those ways is okay. Putting it at the end of the meeting after everything's been done, I think is a little bit disingenuous to let, now the meeting's about over. You can talk on any of the agenda items that we've already voted on, and we're not going to change our mind. That's not really fair. But the way meetings go crazy, and I know your managers can tell you this, is when the chair lets the audience members just shout out questions and comments, and the audience member might as well be sitting at the board table and we're just having a coffee klatch to talk about this. That not controlling the owners and when they get to speak is what make board meetings that should be an hour go 2.5 hours. Laura or Shauna, you have any experience with that?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, just control.
Shauna's getting red in the face.
Yeah. Let them know up front that we are going to hear you. You will have an ample time to speak on the agenda item. But if you shout out and disrupt the meeting and try to talk when you're not asked to talk, we're just going to put our heads down and go through the meeting, and you're not going to hear a thing. So that's a key component, and that takes a strong chair. Now, I know I've been at meetings where it's almost impossible to get through it because you've got a crowd in the back. The meeting started at 6:30. They had a few cocktails, and it becomes like a mini riot. Okay. What you do there, and I've done it many times, is if they simply won't respect the chair, at the next board meeting, you have an off-duty police officer, sheriff's officer that usually costs $100 an hour, $150 an hour. You bring them to the meeting. They'll stand in the corner, and when the meeting's about to start, you see, we want to introduce Officer Smith here. He's going to be our sergeant at arms to keep things under control. Anybody that is getting out of control will be escorted out by Officer Smith. And if you all don't act like professionals and adults and let us conduct our board meeting properly, Officer Smith is going to be here every month until you all, get things in control. It's your money we're spending. It's our money we're spending. We don't want him here, but that's what's going to happen. Usually you do that once. You don't have to do it again, typically. Okay. Manage conflicts that arise during the meeting. There's always a couple of board members that don't like each other, the sniping and the little underhanded comments and the, that's what your wife told me kind of stuff. It's just unnecessary and it shouldn't be there. Okay. So just the chair has to keep that stuff and they'll know the personalities and what buttons people are trying to push. So try to do that. Number 8, ensure that decisions are made clearly and explicitly by vote, so there's no room for misunderstanding or misinterpretation. That's very important. After you've had the motion and the second, and you've had the discussion, you might even repeat the motion. Okay, we're voting on Ms. Director Smith's motion to paint the clubhouse green. All those in favor say aye, all those opposed say nay. Now, you really should do a roll call vote because the minutes in a condo and an HOA, the statute says the vote of all directors will be recorded in the minutes. So those times where you see unanimous 5-0 or 3-2 motion fails, that's not sufficient. That's not letting your minutes or people that read the minutes know who voted. It really should be Director Smith, yes, no, Director Jones, yes, no, so on and so forth down the line. So we've talked about read and call. We can go to the next slide here.
And while you're, I'll let you finish that before we go to
No,
questions.
so this is number 10 is what I just talked about. Let's talk about the discussion in the minutes, okay? Remember, to do board business, there's a motion, there's a second, there's discussion, there's owner discussion, then there's a vote, okay? That discussion period portion does not, there doesn't have to be any words in that section other than a short discussion was held on the topic. That's all you legally would have to put, or you could put there was no discussion and go to the vote. You do not have to put the literal every word spoken from the board and from the audience in there so that the next 5.5 pages of the minutes become a verbatim recitation of every word spoken. That's not required by the law. It's not a good idea. It loads the minutes up with all kinds of little things that lawyers like to look at and say, this wasn't right or that wasn't right. So if you want to put a couple of sentences about the discussion, there was discussion held that maybe green was better than blue, that's sufficient, but don't load it up with sentence after sentence after sentence. I actually had a lawsuit once where one director sued another director for defamation, and they used the meeting minutes to allege the defamation. Right here in the minutes, you called me a liar. That's what it was. And, that doesn't have to be in the meeting minutes, and there's really no good reason to put it in there. So go ahead, Laura, you had a question?
Yeah. No, they don't need to be dictated, is what I'm saying, in meeting minutes. Some board members want a dictated, the whole meeting dictated, like a doctor, a surgeon's report. It doesn't need to be that way.
No. If you use a recording device to capture what went on so that you can later draft the minutes properly, that's perfectly fine. Your policy can be either A, to then destroy the recording or erase it, or keep it. If you keep the recording, it becomes an official record open to owners that they can get anytime they want. So our recommendation is you use those recordings for the 30-day period till you finish the minutes, and then you erase it or delete it.
We had a few questions come in. Amy had a couple, and I think you kind of addressed most of these. Is it okay for a loose meeting where owners are allowed to discuss with the board before the vote? Which I think you said discussions before the vote. And then is unanimous vote not okay in the minutes, or only roll call or notate who is against? So you said list each person and what their vote was the best.
List each person and their vote. So unanimous, even though it's understood what it means, I don't think that's a good practice. It says the vote of each director is reflected. We take that to mean the name of the director and their vote.
Okay, and then Diane, during a motion, when you ask the owners if they have any questions, how much time is allowed? 1 minute? Question mark. Is it? Yeah. So Robert's rule, right?
Yeah. The statute says the board could adopt a policy for reasonable rules regarding the discussion or participation of the members at the meeting, the owners. The general rule is 3 minutes. Okay, there's a couple of general rules. 3 minutes. I've seen it, a little longer, but I don't recommend going shorter than 3 minutes. But it should be generally this: you get 3 minutes per topic. You only get to speak once. There's no rebuttal. And here's another trick: there will be no assigning of your minutes to someone else. Okay, that's a trick that groups like to use, where they walk in and they say, Billy Bob is our spokesperson for our anti-pickleball group, which is really, there's always an anti-pickleball and a pro pickleball. That's a whole nother webinar. And we've assigned each of our 3 minutes to him. He now has 90 minutes to talk to you about pickleball. That's not a good idea. And it's perfectly legal to say, no, you got to speak yourself. The other thing is, obviously, encourage people, look, don't get up and say that you agree, or you just say everything the person just said. If you just want to say, I agree with Mr. Smith's comments, that's my 3 minutes, and move on, that keeps things moving.
Okay. Michael asked you, and you kind of answered this. Do you have to keep the recording? How long do you have to keep the recording? So you said it's up to you, but it does become official record if you keep it.
If you keep it beyond the actual approval of the minutes, then it's an official record. You got to keep it for 7 years.
Okay. And then Mark, last one. Is it okay to go back more than 30 days to write up board minutes or modify them?
I don't know if it's the law that says you have to do the board minutes within 30 days. Most bylaws will set a time period. I don't know that the statute necessarily, I think it just says a reasonable time the minutes will be created. When you create the minutes, if there's an error in the minutes that was discovered months later, I believe the board could vote to reopen the minutes and correct the error.
Okay. And could the draft minutes be sent to the membership if requested before the minutes are approved?
It's a good question. Draft minutes are official records available to owners that make it a request. I would not encourage that because they're draft and they might change. If they're going to be draft, then put that watermark on there that says draft unofficial or something, but they are available to owners that make a request. When you make an official records request, you have 10 business days to complete the request, which is actually about 15 days or can be even longer. So I don't encourage the dissemination of draft minutes unless someone expressly requests them in an official records request, because now you've got 2 sets of documents out there that are confusing and will cause problems.
All right. That's all the questions for now.
Okay, so one of the most important things is respect everybody's time and start the meeting on time, end it on time. If Director Smith is chronically late just because he is, don't wait for him. Start the meeting, okay? If they're late because, hey, I'm stuck in traffic, this doesn't happen very often, can you hold the meeting for 10 minutes? That's perfectly fine. But Director Smith, who shows up chronically late, chronically unprepared, and delays everything, you start it on time. And when he comes in and says, well, can you go back over everything I just missed because I wasn't here? No, we're not going back over it. We're moving on. If we need to start the meeting at 10 to 8 every time so that you'll show up on time at 8, then maybe that's what you do. But if the person disrespects the rest of your time, which you showed up on time, you showed up prepared, don't baby them, just move on. You didn't show up? No, we're not going on. If you need their vote, well, that might be a different story, but too bad, so everybody needs to respect everybody's time and keep things moving. We talked about this. If there's a special reason, then obviously you could delay the meeting. Similarly, if a topic generates more discussion than you thought, you can always extend it. It's not rigid, okay? But and I've seen boards that are too rigid, okay? They really almost run it like, I often have to correct them because they don't ask for owner input, okay? They just move on through, and that's a little, I know the boards like to have no owner input because they don't want any hard questions sometimes, but you got to play fair to a degree, okay? Okay, meeting procedures and quorum. So here's the basic process, and we'll go through this pretty quickly. You call the meeting to order, okay? You establish that there's a quorum. We have 3 out of 5 board members here. They are John, Smith, and Sally, okay? Establish proof of notice of the meeting. That's usually done by affidavit, signed by your manager. The notice was published in accordance with Florida law. So those are the first 3 things. That should take a minute, no more than a minute to do this. Review the agenda. You could just briefly say, we're going to talk about dogs and cats and painting the clubhouse. That's the agenda. That's all we're talking about and all we're voting on. That's the agenda. Review and approve the previous minutes. The best way to do that is do not read the minutes out loud for everybody, and don't do it at the membership meeting either. You certainly can do it, but there's nothing that I hate more than being asked to go to an annual members meeting. And the first thing they do is they're going to read the 6-page of minutes from last year. It's just a waste of time. They should be included in the meeting package, whether it's a board meeting or an annual meeting package, and simply say, I'll accept a motion for the minutes to be approved as presented. If someone has a correction, they might say, Mr. Chair or Madam Chair, I want to have one correction to the minutes. It says that this happened and that didn't happen. So you might amend it, but you don't need to spend a lot of time on the minutes. Be careful of people that are trying to insert things in the minutes that really didn't happen, or that they want in there, but it was in the discussion and you didn't put it in there. A lot of times, they're just doing that for self-serving purposes. Next, call the agenda item, ask for the second, have the discussion, and vote on the items. That's the order. Now, I see a lot of meetings where the agenda item comes up and everybody jumps right to the discussion. And they're just, well, it's dogs, and they start talking about dogs and blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, then let's vote on things. And you say, no, wait a minute. You got to have a motion. So then you have a motion and they say, well, now let's vote. No, you got to have a second. If all 4 of those components are there and they happen, that's okay. You've got them. They'll be in the proper order in your minutes, and everything's fine. However, keep in mind, if there's a motion and there is no second, then there is no discussion and there is no vote. So if to pacify Director A, who harps on the same thing over and over and over again, that the 4 out of 5 of you have already decided and moved on, to pacify that person, okay, you're Director Smith, you wanted the issue of big dogs on the agenda. It's time for big dogs. Make a motion. I make a motion. We pass a rule getting rid of big dogs. Don't second the motion. If you don't second the motion, there is no discussion. There is no vote. So if the 3 out of 5 of you have decided something and you're not going to go back over it, don't second the motion and move on. There is no discussion. That's end of story. And then obviously there's generally adjournment. Now, one thing, again, you can keep the members' comments, the owner's comments, to just agenda items. That's perfectly legal. That's all what the law says. But it's common to have on the agenda an item that's more broad, like owner comments, okay? Where the owners have a period of time to comment on anything they want, whether it's on the agenda or not. That is oftentimes a healthy thing to do, so people know that I can come to the meeting next Tuesday night and tell them that I think the streetlight's out over on Maple Street. That's perfectly fine, but you're not required to have that on the agenda. And if, as often occurs, that open discussion becomes a bash the board, scream about all the problems and blah, 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 take it off the agenda. You're not required to have an open free-for-all discussion on the agenda. The owners are required to talk, or allowed to talk, on the items on the agenda. And if the agenda is pets, parking, and leasing, those are the only things that they have a legal right to talk about. So if the open discussion section of your agenda is healthy and it's productive, keep it on there. If it becomes a free-for-all, take it off. Then there's obviously an adjournment. Okay.
We had a couple of questions come in. If you take attendance, then a board member comes in late, do you then retake attendance?
Well, you might note that yet again, Mr. Smith showed up late at 8:10. I'm not saying be snippy like that, but you need to show that he or she showed up. You don't have to take attendance again. You would just note at in the minutes, that he showed up.
And then, so I think this is more talking about, because you addressed normal board minutes. I think this is more maybe annual meeting. Should drafted minutes be only in board pack or should also available to owners?
No, they would be in the board pack only. They're available to owners who request them through an official records request. I don't recommend voluntarily giving out draft minutes to the owners because I just think it's time consuming and it's going to be confusing if you change them and et cetera. So, okay. One of the best ways to hold an effective meetings is to put thought into the agenda, distribute it prior to the meeting, then stick closely to it during the meeting. Ideally, agendas should notice the topics. We've talked about this. The action required. For example, you might have on the agenda, pool house, roof, discussion only. You might just say discussion only. We're not going to vote on anything to do with the roof. We're just going to discuss it, maybe 5 minutes. If it's a vote on something, the agenda might say vote on roof contract, okay? So say what you're going to be doing in that agenda item. An agenda item that just says roof, clubhouse roof, I think the agenda should be informative enough so that if I am an owner that wants to come to the board meeting and I look at the agenda for next Tuesday night, I have a reasonable idea of what's going to occur, okay? So particularly when you're fining someone or suspending their use rights, where it just says fine, imposing fines. I know you don't want to embarrass people, but if I'm the subject of the fine, I should have enough notice that I'm going to be the topic of discussion. So if it's going to fine someone, it might be suspension of 3132 Maple Street, okay, or Unit 21 or whatever. The agenda should be reasonably informative is what I'm trying to say. Again, that timeline associated with each agenda item, try that for your next board meeting and see if it doesn't help things go a little bit faster. If it doesn't work, you don't have to keep doing it. Okay. Sometimes there's standing items on the agenda, just reports of committees. That's perfectly fine. Committee reports is where a board meeting can get really long, okay? And I think the next couple of slides kind of discuss that. And the committees are important and they have a role and they're very helpful and some of them are very, very diligent and very passionate about their committee. I find this particularly with the landscaping committees. They're very passionate. They're horticulturists, they're landscapers in their prior life. They're really good at what they do. So they really feel that the whole reason for this board meeting tonight is really their committee. And you should have people that are excited and passionate about their committee. But when they write a 6-page report and they want to stand up and they want to read that report, and down to the minutia of we're planting petunias this year at the clubhouse instead of pansies. Here's why we're doing it. Petunias are known to be a hardier plant in Florida. And no. You fine, put it in your report. We love it. Give us your report. It will go in the official records. Anybody that wants to come and get your report, they can have it and your great work will be known, but the committee reports should hit the highlights, okay? Don't read the entire report down to the level of that detail. It just is unnecessary. And most people, frankly, if it's not their committee, they don't really care that much about it. They're happy that you're doing a good job, report on the couple of successes. And with PowerPoints, I've seen, then they'll come in with a PowerPoint and we get, okay, thanks. Okay. No, I'm in the middle of this. Sorry, can't. Sorry. So, I mean.
PowerPoint. We were talking about PowerPoint to committee.
PowerPoint where they're showing the pictures of the petunias. I mean, that's great. It's fantastic, but it just doesn't need to be in a regular board meeting. Maybe at the annual meeting, you let them go a little further, although I've seen quite lengthy reports in that regard as well. So ask them to present their report, put it in their records, let the audience know the report is available to anybody who wants it, and ask the chair to give 2 minutes on the highlights of the report. The roof is finally done and the bill was paid and, everything's great, whatever it might be. So keep the report short. Yeah, we talked about this. One way, just a discussion. And then they'll ask, are there any questions of the committee chair? That's okay. You're not required to have questions from the audience for the committee chairs. That's not required by law. It's certainly okay, but sometimes that can get quite lengthy as well. So I would try to limit the number of questions for the chair or ask owners to submit them. Although they get their 3 minutes, okay, they get their 3 minutes, so they could ask their questions. If that's the agenda item, landscape report, they would get their 3 minutes. So I guess you would give that to them, but try to keep it, moving. Okay, we've talked about this. Include the report in the package, hit the highlights, have the directors read it before the meeting, allow members to obtain a copy. That's everything we just went through. Again, acknowledge the report. If you have certain questions, ask them. You want to be respectful of the committee's work because they play a big role in your operation of your association.
Now we have several questions. Shauna, are we? Let's see.
I answered one, but the rest of them, yeah.
Let's see. Are there required master board specific subcommittees by law? I'm not sure.
No, the only committee, there are no committees required by law, but if you have an ARC committee or a committee that expends this final authority to spend association funds, or the budget committee in a condo or a co-op, those committees have to meet with the formalities of a board, which means open meetings, notice, opportunity to talk. All other committees do not have to meet like a board. In an HOA, they don't have to meet like a board unless the bylaws say they do. In a condo, it's the exact opposite. They do have to meet like a board. All committees have to meet like a board in a condo or a co-op unless the bylaws say they don't, okay? So you need to check your bylaws as to whether your committees have to meet with the formalities of a board, which means 48-hour posted notice, right to attend, right to speak of the owners.
All right, we've got, should members sign in on a sign-in sheet at each meeting?
It's a common practice. I think it's a good idea. You can often use that as your policy for speaking at the board meeting. That's a good way to control owner comments, is to have a policy that says you have to sign up. When you sign in, you have to sign up to speak at the meeting. If you have not signed up to speak at the meeting, you will not be recognized to speak at the meeting. That's a good way, I guess, Shauna and Laura, you've probably used that before, because people that don't think they want to speak at the meeting and then they get mad and they want to speak, you could tell them, no, you didn't sign up. That's our policy. It should be a written policy. You don't have to do it that way, but I think that's a good way to control lengthy owner comment periods. You say, well, you didn't sign up. Come to the next meeting. Sign up early.
All right, more questions. Do the committees need to turn in their own meeting minutes to be posted?
The committees do not have to keep meeting minutes unless they are one of those committees that has to operate with the formality of a board, which is an architectural control committee with final decision authority, a budget committee for a condo or a co-op, or a committee that has final authority to take action on behalf of the board. Most committees are advisory in nature and do not have to keep minutes.
A question on agendas and meeting notices. Is an agenda required to be noticed along with the meeting notice?
In a condo and a co-op, the answer is yes. The notice must include an agenda. In an HOA, the statute does not say the notice has to include an agenda. The bylaws may. However, I believe it's very good business practice to include an agenda, even in an HOA.
Agreed. All right.
Again, these lengthy reports are not necessarily have to be read. The audience members will often come to the meeting as well, and they're going to use their 3 minutes to publish a parade of horribles that the board is doing and how bad they all are. I mean, if they want to stand up and read that, that's fine. It doesn't go into the meeting minutes. If they want to turn their diatribe on paper into the board, then it becomes an official record. I would not load up the board meeting packages with any diatribes from angry owners unless you believe it's relevant. If you believe it's important and it's relevant, put it in there. But every piece of bash the board material you get doesn't have to be in the meeting packets beforehand. Okay, effective participation. We've kind of gone through most of this, I think. All board members have a right and responsibility to ensure to be ready and ensure the effectiveness of the meeting. This includes, we talked about this, arrive on time, read the material, respect others, avoid interrupting and rudeness and side conversations. Be open-minded. You might change your mind with some relevant discussion. Ask for, if you're not clear on what you're voting on, then ask. Carefully worded motions, make sure everybody understands it. We talked about this, written policy on how they may speak and how long, and speak on agenda items only unless you want to have that open forum, which can be healthy if it's limited. Okay, meeting, this is our last part, and we're just cruising through this. Meeting sabotage. The interesting story about this is, we have any other questions yet?
We have one question that came in. Let's see. If there are only 2 people on a committee in a condo association, do they have to post notice of their meeting?
It's not the number of people on the meeting, on the committee. It's whether it's a committee that is the architectural committee to make final decision, a budget committee in a condo and a co-op, or a committee with final authority to spend money on behalf of the board. Those, it's not the number of people, it's the type of committee, and whether your bylaws require all committees to meet like a board or only those designated statutory committees to meet like a board. You got to check your bylaw. So a friend of mine found this manual, and we thought this was kind of funny. This was I believe this is a true story, don't hold me to it, but this was a field book published by the organization prior to the CIA to help people that are being I don't know, it was during World War II when they were occupied forces in their country. This was how the populace could help, like, derail the
meetings.
Of the occupying force. So some of these tips are interesting, and you'll recognize these tips in some of your board members when they want to delay a certain action because they don't like it or something. So.
All right, we ready to disclose this?
Top secret information. Okay, you'll recognize this. Number 1, make speeches and talk as frequently as possible at great length. Illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experiences. Okay, we all know there's a board member that does this. They may do it not even knowing they're doing it, or they may be doing it because they want to drag the meeting out and they want to get to it. So this goes back to the role of the chair. Tell Director Smith, let's get to the point here, okay? How y'all did it up north in Maine isn't really relevant to how we're doing it down here in Florida today. So, that's the role of the chair. And don't let these people take over the meeting with this filibustering.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, the board member will interrupt the others frequently with off-topic matters. Again, this goes back to the chair. I mean, you got to control those, and this might come from the audience as well, where they're interrupting, and you just got to control them by not allowing them to interrupt. If they won't stop interrupting, then your remaining board members, or if it's the owners interrupting, just put your heads down and do the business. And if they're screaming and saying, we can't hear you, you say, well, that's because he won't stop talking. Okay. You don't have to acknowledge this person trying to disrupt your meeting. You can just plow through it. As difficult as it may be, you can just plow right through it. Motion second, discussion, vote, and or you just get up and walk out, but that might be exactly what they want you to do. This is the classic one. Number 3, we see this in our own federal government and our own local government. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study, okay? We see this all the time. I know Laura's heard this story before. You'll see it when there is some national problem that the federal government or your local government really doesn't want to give you a concrete solution or answer to, okay? Whatever it might be. They will appoint typically a blue ribbon panel made up of probably too many people, 15 people, the former dean of academics at Stanford, the former this, the former that. They give you their long resumes. This is a blue ribbon panel to study this issue so we can decide what to do. And you'll hear about it when it kicked off, and you might hear about one update, and then hopefully you never quite hear from that blue ribbon panel again, and things have moved on down the line, and the government was never held accountable to do anything about what the people wanted them to do. I mean, that's a classic way to delay things. Now, maybe your board wants to use that tactic to pacify the audience who thinks you need to do something. So appoint the panel and kick the can down the road. On the other hand, the committee, the board member that says, we need to study this more. They're oftentimes simply trying to delay. So don't let that happen. Number 4, bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. That goes without saying, keep it on topic. The person likes to haggle over the precise wordings of the communications in the minutes, because resolutions, even when the majority believes it's very clear. This is the classic Bill Clinton line. What is the definition of is? What is? Or you give me don't get bogged down with this. I mean, if 4 out of 5 of you clearly understand what this is about, and the other person is simply saying, well, I'm still confused. I don't understand. How could this be? If you all reasonably feel that it should be understandable to the average person, then move on. You don't have to keep going over it, because oftentimes all they're trying to do is delay things, okay? Number 6, refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting and attempt to reopen the question, okay? That's a classic example. Technically, Robert's Rules of Order covers this. If an item of business passed, let's say a majority of 3-2, the only group that can bring that item back up for revote are any of the 3 that voted in favor of the action, okay? You get the 2 that lost and say, well, I want to vote on that again. Robert's Rules of Order does not let the minority board members that were in the minority reopen the item to rehash it again. It only must come from the side that won the issue. So if it was 3-2 to paint the clubhouse blue, and at the next meeting, the 2 were complaining. I was going to say something about B and Ming, but I didn't say that. And they we want red. The 2 cannot say, I make a motion, we revote on whether to paint it red instead of blue. They don't have that right under Robert's Rules of Order. The 3 directors that voted to paint it blue could make a motion to bring it back to revisit it if they have the support to do it, which is a motion and a second. So that's one way to do that. Scare tactics. Okay, this often comes from the audience itself, that they want to tell, if the audience says, if you do that, we're going to sue you. We're going to sue you. We're going to sue you. The threat of a lawsuit should not be used typically to delay the action. And in this day and age, with difficult decisions that boards have to make regarding insurance premiums and hurricane rebuild and all of these, some of them unprecedented decisions that we've had to face in the last couple of months for various reasons, that some people like and some people don't like, and all of that. If you've vetted your decision with your local, your legal counsel, with your insurance agent, with your manager, with the appropriate professional, the engineer that says you have to tear down the parking garage because of the hurricane, don't let the threats of lawsuits from the owners delay that decision that needs to be timely made. As long as you've done your homework and you can back up your decision with the proper authorities of engineers and lawyers and insurance and everything, you're going to be fine. You may get sued. It may not stop a lawsuit, but you will not be personally liable. So don't let the threat of a personal lawsuit against you stop you as a board member from making decisions, because as a not-for-profit organization that most condos and HOAs are, 617, you're protected a great deal from personal liability. So don't let the threat of the lawsuit stop you. So that's it.
Wow, you did it right on time, but we do have some questions.
Okay.
Let's see. Patricia wants to confirm every board member must vote except for conflict of interest.
The answer is yes. Let me expound on that a little bit. A common tactic of a board member is to say, I'm abstaining. And to properly abstain, you have to state a conflict of interest on the record. And the conflict has to be something like, my spouse works at that company, or my brother-in-law owns that company, or I own part of that company, or you have some familial or financial interest in that company or that outcome of that thing. That's a proper conflict of interest. 9 times out of 10, the board member doesn't have a conflict. It's more like, I live next door to that guy and I golf with him, and I don't want to hear about what we're about to do because he's not going to like it. So I'm not going to vote. That's not a proper abstention, and they're not allowed to abstain for that. Now, you can't put a gun to their head and say you have to vote, but you can note in the meeting minutes that Director Smith abstained for an improper reason, okay? So when you're on the board, you're hired to make decisions in the sunshine and take the slings and arrows that are going to come from making decisions that affect other people's lives. If you're not up for that, then don't be on the board.
Becky asked, are there normal board committees for condominium associations that help to make boards operate more efficiently?
Sure. Well, Laura or Shauna, why don't you give us some typical committees that you think are valuable for boards?
Besides the ones that are by statute, finding an ARC,
Yeah.
I would say landscaping typically, or if you've got a specific, if it's a marina or a dock, unless you've got a board that oversees those things.
Most common, like you said,
Social.
landscape, finance, social.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are the most common ones. Some, it really depends on putting the parameters on your committees, because sometimes committees can get out of hand and out of control. And then
Mhm.
other times committees can be super helpful, and beneficial to the community. So it really it depends on the community itself and the culture of the community.
Right. Okay.
Where do you keep policies regarding board meeting participation? I'm assuming, David, you may be referencing policies you can adopt for board meetings. You can reach out. You can reach out to Richard or myself or us, and we can provide some sample policies.
Yeah, and then you would post them on your website or have them available to people, and then it's good to refer to the policy. It says right here that you can only speak once.
Yeah. And Diane, can you please elaborate on how to correctly and efficiently or effectively run a town hall meeting?
Well, a town hall meeting is typically a gathering of members to discuss an item like a document rewrite project or an update on Hurricane Ian issues, etc. But what's funny is those town hall meetings, the board is almost always sitting up at the front of the meeting, fielding questions and giving updates. So technically, it's a board meeting, but on the agenda could simply be town hall discussion of new amended and restated governing documents or something. And typically the board will present whatever the issue is, and then it's a little more free form and a little more open, not as strict, because you're not going to take any action at a town hall meeting. It's really informational, so you can be a little more lax in running, letting people speak more than once and things like that. Because it's really, most town hall meetings are designed to either update the owners on something or to gain input from the owners. Again, like a document rewrite project, you're there to get information and input from the owners, so you know what they will accept in these new documents and what they won't. So it can be a little more loose, but I still think you should put a time frame on it. This will be a 90-minute town hall, an 80-minute town hall, whatever it might be.
Yeah, we commonly see them with our developer communities. Like the developer will hold town hall that aren't official meetings, but to do exactly what you said, give updates, get some feedback from the community. So it's very common with those communities.
Correct.
All right, another question. Does the ARC committee, which is required by statute, have to have 48-hour notice and minutes? And do they need to send out the proposed submission materials to the members?
Yes, yes, and no. They have to have 48-hour posted notice. They have to keep meeting minutes. They're not required to send anything out to the owners. The subtlety in the statute is that if it's an ARC committee that makes the final decision, okay, that's when it has to meet like a board. Some ARCs meet and make a recommendation to the board, and the board at their next meeting makes the final approval. So in that subtle distinction, the ARC is not making the final decision. They would not have to meet like a board, and they could meet privately. But most ARCs, the ARC board makes the actual decision. They need minutes, they need notice. They don't have to send anything out to the owners.
All right, a final question from Amy. With volunteer boards with possible turnover annually, how do we keep track of past rules, policies, or changes made?
Well, Shauna and Laura, you probably have some input on this, but I think typically there would be a policy book or a rule book or something. That's important because I get that all the time. well, our policy is to do this. Well, was that ever written down? No. When did you adopt that policy? Oh, I don't know. And I have situations where lawsuits have come up about the policy. And it's critical when you don't know where it was or when it was imposed, and that can work for you or against you. So it's a good idea to have a formal policy book so you know when it was adopted and et cetera.
Yep, we have, so if you're professionally managed, yes, they should have we have a folder on our drive under your association where it would have policies adopted by the board. And that would be there. If you're self-managed or, portfolio, you would want to keep a book of some sort with your policies.
Okay.
All right, I think that's everything. Well done.
Okay.
Thank
we
you,
hope found
Richard.
this helpful. If you need anything, contact Gassel or me, and we'll see you again on another topic.
Yes, you will. Thank you, guys. Everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.